Qatar lashes out at the UN for failing to understand Ethiopia. Hello and welcome to Addis News Hour with the Nizam Shifarau Lakum. The negotiation between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt is in a recess. A blatant remark by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt about the use of the Nile appears to be provocative. Responding to the president's audacious comments, spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, Ambassador Dina Mufti, says Ethiopia won't relent to any other option than negotiation. Alula Taklamariam reports.
The dispute between Ethiopia and Egypt over the contentious hydropower dam Ethiopia is erecting over the river Abai seems to take another turn following Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's blatant remarks about the use of the Nile. Though Ethiopia unequivocally asserted that the dam will cause no significant harm to the downstream countries, Egypt always opts to ignite disputes over the dam. Taking Ethiopia's internal political quagmire as an opportunity, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt Tuesday threw warning on his televised address. Sisi said there would be severe regional consequences if Egypt's water supply were affected by the giant hydropower dam being built by Ethiopia.
احنا ما بنتكلمش كتير بس انا بقول للناس كلها ما حدش هيقدر ياخد نقطة مية من مصر واللي عايز يجرب احنا ما بنهددش حد لو سمحتوا ما احنا عمرنا ما هددنا ودايما حوارنا رشيد جدا و يعني صبور جدا لكن ما حدش هيقدر ياخد نقطة مية من مصر والا هيبقى في حالة من عدم الاستقرار في المنطقة لا يتخيلها احد وما حدش يتصور انه يقدر يبقى بعيد عن قدرتنا. لا انا عمري ما اتكلمت كده وانا ما هددش حد. بقول تاني ميه مصر لا مساس بيها والمساس بيها خط احمر وهيبقى رد فعلنا في حاله المساس بيها امر هيأثر على استقرار المنطقه بالكامل. شكرا.
Replying to the president's audacious remarks Wednesday, spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, Ambassador Dina Mufti, said both countries have no option to reach an agreement other than negotiation. Dina said throwing threatening comments will bring no change but strains relations.
Nile is our gift, a transboundary river of which 86% of this water emanates from Ethiopia. Though Ethiopia is not utilizing it to its full capacity, we know that Ethiopia is we have a right to use it. Now, Ethiopia believes strongly that Nile should be a source of cooperation, not a source of conflict, not a source of confusion. It should be a source of cooperation. This is what we are telling our downstream countries. That is why we are regularly and faithfully attending the trilateral talks. That is why we are always opting for amicable solutions, win-win solutions. That is why we are always saying we are out for win-win solutions. I think these instances, these are positions, equally benefits the downstream countries that are Egypt and Sudan. And I think this is the only option. This is the option that can benefit all of us. Let's everybody remind himself or herself about common benefits, not about threats. The threats do not help. Nobody could benefit from threats. Threats of wars are destructive. And they then do not benefit anyone. No one could be a winner. Everybody will lose. So I think we should desist from those sorts of things.
Ethiopia, unrelenting with its firm stance of building the dam on its own resource, set us to execute the second filling by the coming rainy season. The country repeatedly rebuked Egypt's desire to monopolize the Nile water, which does not contribute a drop of water.
Now we'll be staying on this issue, and to tell us more on the issue, we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Elias Abi-Shahra, who is a geographer. Dr. Elias, welcome to the...
Thank you for inviting me.
As you heard from the news, the Egyptian president has warned that there would be severe regional consequences if Egypt's water supply is affected by the flagship dam that Ethiopia is building on the Nile. What kind of implication does this have?
Well, I think we're used with this kind of rhetorics from the Egyptian ruler. I think they have the right to worry about the water, but we have the right also to use the water to produce electricity. Can you imagine that 60 million people can't have light in the evening, and children cannot study in the evening at home? We're obliged to cut forests to use for cooking, and this means that we're aggravating the climate issue. So if you see the geography of Ethiopia, except the Awash River, all the rivers of Ethiopia go out of the country. So what are we going to do? Just sit down and watch our water flow out of Ethiopia without doing anything? The Egyptians haven't changed their mindsets, and they are still with the period of the pharaohs, and 4,000 years ago. And Ethiopia has 120 million people. Egypt has 120 million people. I don't talk about the Nile Basin. I think Kenya has got 55 million people, Uganda 45 million people. So are we going to continue with the mindset of the Egyptians 4,000 years ago? So whatever they think, one day, whether they like it or not, we're going to use the Nile water. Now, what Ethiopia has always said, equitable use of the Nile water is absolutely right. They're not, I don't think that boasting or trying to have psychological terror is going to solve the problem. We are respecting the Egyptian people, we respect the Sudanese people, but we have our own interests, and we must solve the interests of the Ethiopian people. Any government in Ethiopia has the obligation to solve the problem of the Ethiopian society, not of the Egyptian or the Sudanese society.
And are such provocative comments about Ethiopia's flagship project expected from a leader? And is it a threat maybe to regional peace and security as well?
Well, they can, I think, I know the history of my country. For nearly 150 years, every ruler has to handle war. The Emperor Todros had the British, as Emperor Johannes IV had the Dervish Sudanese, then Emperor Melik had the Italians, Emperor Haile Selassie had the Italians and the Somalis, etc. So I think the threat is not going to make Ethiopians shiver or I don't know what, because we're not afraid of going to war. We don't like war, but I don't think we're afraid of war. And I think that, let me tell you something, war with the neighbor is always used to cover internal problems. And Egypt has a lot of problems. I can tell you that when you have, that recently they have 40,000 political prisoners, and there are a lot of social problems in Egypt. You know that the military are involved in the economy, and they are always winning the bids to different projects, and the private sector is complaining because there are not the possibility of using the opportunity to intervene in the Egyptian economy is very, very thin. And, well, I think the president of Egypt is using, he needs a scapegoat. And the scapegoat is the Nile Dam. That's what I think.
Now, this being as it is, Ethiopia is still clinging to its fair stance, its stance of fair utilization of the Abai River. What should the country do in the future?
Well, I think the first thing is to have a global unity in the country. I think there is a very good trend. Look about the money raised for the GERD. It's very promising. And when the government has all the support of the whole country, it's a very important thing. Secondly, I think the most important is to have public relation in the West, especially. I can tell you, I've lived 37 years in France, and if you tell the French people, 60 million people don't have electricity, you tell the Americans, you tell the Germans, the British, it's very hard to be against this. So we must have a very aggressive and active diplomacy outside to win hearts and support us on this project.
And now Ethiopia is building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. How important do you believe that the dam will be for Ethiopia and also the lower riparian countries?
Recently, I heard our Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy, said, if we just give all the enterprises in Ethiopia all the electricity they need, without even building one single factory, will double the production of Ethiopia. That's, I think it's enough to explain the importance of the dam. Then you have neighboring Eritrea. If we give them, they can build up their economy. We have Djibouti, Kenya, even the Sudan, Somalia. And you know, I think I remember when I was a young person who was interested in politics, Vladimir Lenin of Russia said, progress is Soviet plus electricity. So I think it's an essential part. Look at the consumption. When you fly over the countries in the evening, you will see when you are in the West, many lights. You see what's the importance of light and electricity. You don't have electricity, I think you will still stay fourth, fifth grade country.
Dr. Elias, thank you so much for your perspectives.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, moving to other news items, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, Ambassador Dina Mufti, says his latest remark about Eritrea and Ethiopia has been misquoted. The ambassador says his remark had no intention to disregard Eritreans' independence. It rather was to emphasize the close relationship and neighborliness of the two sisterly countries. Here is what he said.
Yesterday we have had a weekly press briefing at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whereby I was asked about the possible confederal relationship between the two countries. My comment was like this. I said the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea is currently cordial. We have overcome the period of adversity in which we have been to the unfortunate war, and unfortunate no war, no peacetime. And I said there is an opportunity in the room for improving our relationship. I said not only with Eritrea. He said, leave alone with Eritrea, we can expand our cooperations with other regional neighbors per our foreign policy. I said with Kenya, with Djibouti, and other neighboring countries as well. This is a context in which I was briefing the media. Though some quarters have picked it as if I have a doubt about the Eritrean independence. Ethiopian government is committed to the Eritrean independence. Ethiopia is committed to Eritrean sovereignty. We know that Eritreans love their countries. I very much appreciate their patriotism and the sort of nationalism they have, and I have respect for them as well. And it's non-starter to doubt about their commitment to their sovereignty, to their independence. So I like the way some media outlets were portraying it. So therefore, I want to reiterate this. One, Ethiopia, including Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is committed to the Eritrean sovereignty and the Eritrean independence. We have no doubt that Eritreans are patriots, they love their countries.
Now, the Ethiopian ambassador to Qatar, Samia Zakaria, in her article to Al Jazeera, says the international community's support for the humanitarian situation in the state of Tigray far from matches its insensate condemnation in the previous time. It even fails to acknowledge the government's stepped-up humanitarian response that has reached more than 4.2 million people to date, despite limited resources. Habtamu Ashagri presents the story as follows.
In her article on Al Jazeera, Ambassador Plenipotentiary of Ethiopia to Qatar, Sami Zakaria, severely criticizes the UN and other international organizations for failing to understand Ethiopia. The ambassador said the pleas of Ethiopia to the League of Nations have repeatedly been ignored since the time of Emperor Haile Selassie. History seems to be repeating itself after 86 years, her article goes on. The vital reform implemented by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his team were very much lauded by the international community. They brought real changes on the ground for which the Ethiopian Prime Minister received the Nobel Peace Prize. These reforms rescued Ethiopia and its people from the grip of the new respective Tigray People's Liberation Front, which had dominated the Ethiopian government since the 1990s. However, we are now witnessing a U-turn by the international community. Misled by orchestrated TPLF misinformation and propaganda, the international community tends to put the blame on Prime Minister Abiy's administration for going after this grave threat to Ethiopian and regional security. Last November's brutal attack by TPLF force against the Ethiopian National Defense Force Northern Command in the state of Tigray region was quite simply a declaration of war. Such an attack against a sovereign country's national defense forces, the ultimate guarantors of a constitution and of any nation, is now something a government can ignore easily. Our constitution stipulates the armed forces shall protect the sovereignty of the country, so the government had to take action as part of fulfilling its basic constitutional duty, which was regrettably not welcomed by some international communities. According to a report by Foreign Policy magazine, in a confidential memo to the UN Secretary General, Hakim Steiner, head of the UNDP, wrote that the TPLF's attack would have been an act of war everywhere in the world and one that typically triggers military response in defense of any nation. This happened in Ethiopia and no one appeared to care about this high crime. Days after the Ethiopian government started the law enforcement operation in the Tigray region, a TPLF-orchestrated massacre took place in Maikadra, which claimed the lives of more than 600 Amhara civilians. Yet, the international community largely ignored it and few dared to condemn it. There was silence also when Sudanese troops violated Ethiopia's sovereignty and territorial integrity in November 2020. It appears it has become easy these days to able one-sided motions at international organizations, mainly at the UN Security Council, before exhausting all available local mechanisms and platforms for resolving such issues. Not only this, but the UN Security Council also discusses the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, a hydroelectric dam that aims to change the lives of tens of millions of poverty-stricken Ethiopians who lack basic access to food and millions more living under safety net programs, including 1.8 million Tigrayans long before the current situation. However, thanks to the Ethiopian government's robust diplomatic efforts and the support of some principled partners, the African Union has stepped in to facilitate trilateral negotiations on the dam. David Beasley, head of the World Food Programme, has called for scaled-up humanitarian support to Tigray, amounting to $107 million. However, the international community and the United Nations have not made adequate support. In fact, as the United Nations Development Programme memo points out, their confrontational approach is likely to be counterproductive and will yield no results. Access to the Tigray region has been adequately provided to both international humanitarian agencies and the media. Yet some in the international community are still calling on the government for unfettered humanitarian access. The Ethiopian government has strongly expressed its full commitment to undertake an in-depth investigation to get to the bottom of the allegation and bring those responsible for any crime to justice. It has also called for a constructive engagement for the international community to support its investigation. The government welcomes the recent understanding between the National Human Rights Commission and the United Nations Human Rights Chief to conduct joint investigations. But it appears some actors are still adopting double standards in their public opinions on the situation in Ethiopia. By contrast, the African Union has been quite responsive. The EU Commission-headed Prime Minister Abiy's call to undertake an investigation jointly with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. This instance shows that our future undeniably lies in the African solutions to African problems, Maxim. Therefore, if multilateralism is alive, the international community should provide significant support to Ethiopia, whose commitment to this principle has not wavered. International actors that consider democracy, peace and security and development as crucial tools of the global order should in principle be ready for constructive engagement and providing much needed assistance to Ethiopia. Yet we would be remiss not to comment the most principled positions of some of our trusted partners during this critical time. Samia concludes the article.
Now, panelists of the Addis Dialogue discussion platform voice concern that the widespread misinformation may hamper the peaceful conduct of the 6th general election Ethiopia is set to hold, making a well-informed society an integral part of a positive result of an election, they underscored. Kasaun Chane presents the full story as follows.
In its second day deliberation, Addis Dialogue discusses the role of the media and the impact of disinformation during the much anticipated 6 upcoming general elections Ethiopia is set to hold in June. The panelists expressed fear that the widespread misinformation surfacing the social and mainstream media in the country would influence the choices of voters during the election. Speaking on the discussion, Solomon Gosho, a lawyer on media-related issues, said the political transition may face uncertainties if voters are misled by false information.
If we do not have well-informed voters, the election process may face uncertainties. The decisions that voters made based on misinformation may reveal the positive result of the election. This deliberately propagated misleading information may hurt the process. These mainly identity-based misinformation are being cooked in a very sophisticated manner to push voters astray.
Voters are the right to access accurate information to make their decisions as for whom to give their votes. One way to prevent false information is to look for evidence and verify the source of the information.
Considering the impact of misinformation, all stakes, including the government, political parties and activists, should act responsibly for the peaceful conduct of the election, it was indicated.
ዳንግላ የሚለው ስያሜ የተሰጠ በመጀመሪያ ዋግምራ ወይም ሰቆጣ ከሚባል አካባቢ ላይ 7 ወንድማማች አገዎች እንደመጡና ወንድማማቾች ወደዚህ አካባቢ ይመጣሉ። ሲያዩት ለምለም ቦታ ሆኖ ያገኙታል። ሲፈልጉ እና በቋንቋቸው ሲነጋገሩ ዳንግ ራሱ ዳንግ ነው ስሙ። የት ሄደ እላ ማለት ባገውኛ የለም ማለት ነው። እዚህ አካባቢ የለም እና ዳንግላ የሚለው ስያሜ ከዚህ አንፃር የመጣ ነው።
የከተማዋ ጉዳይ ከበፊቱ አሁን የተሻሻለ ነገር ነው።
You are still watching Addis News Hour, and thank you for staying with us. Moving on, the Ministry of Health announces that people who do not abide by the new COVID-19 protective guidelines will face severe punitive measures. The Minister, Leah Tadesse, said the rising of positive cases in the past month has led them to put the new directive. Emmanuel Jorge reports.
The new directive put forward by the Ethiopian Ministry of Health strictly prohibits people to violate the protective guidelines of COVID-19. Leah Tadesse, Minister of Health, recently said those who ignore the directive and act irresponsibly will face serious punitive measures. The minister cited the ever-rising of positive cases as a push factor to introduce the new directive.
This directive has been in place even if the case has not been rising, but we have seen that, as you have seen, our number of positive cases have been increasing in the past 1 month, including the number of severe cases. So this requires for the government to take more stringent measures.
According to the directive, any person infected with COVID-19 is barred from entering the country. When receiving the Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccines donation from China on Tuesday, the minister noted that the ministry will implement the new directive by taking serious measures after creating awareness to the community.
This directive has put in place a lot of enforcements, precautions that need to be adhered to and prohibitions, including mandatory use of face mask and many other detailed that are stated in the directive. But there has been gaps in its enforcement, as we all know. So since yesterday, it has been started to fully enforce it by the relevant enforcement authorities. And we will start, of course, by taking smaller measures and more educational measures by enforcement, but progressively the enforcement that will be taken will be more serious and stricter to all institutions, government, non-government, and also to individuals.
The directive states that those who do not comply with the directive will face up to 3 years of imprisonment and other fines.
Now, Ethiopian ambassador to the United Arab Emirates calls on UAE investors to expand their investments in Ethiopia. In a webinar held to strengthen the trade and investment ties between the two countries, the ambassador Suleiman Dedefo said the meeting allows UAE investors to explore more about investment opportunities and trade potentials of Ethiopia. Investment Commissioner Leli Senemi, who took part in the webinar, for her part said the macroeconomic, structural and sectoral reforms undertaken by the government will give investors more confidence to choose Ethiopia. Over 120 UAE investors have so far been engaged in Ethiopia's agriculture, manufacturing, mining, and service sectors companies with a combined capital of more than 2 billion birr. They've also created permanent and temporary job opportunities for more than 10,000 Ethiopians, it was noted. Now moving to continental news. Coffee plantations occupy a total of 110,000 hectares across Kenya. The African country is the fifth largest producer of Arabica coffee on the continent after Ethiopia, Uganda, Ivory Coast, and Tanzania. But Kenyan farmers say they have been severely impacted by climate change. This had led to unpredictable rainfall patterns, drought, and rising temperatures, making crop management and disease control difficult. That's from France 24.
Kenya is fifth largest producer of Arabica coffee. Plantations here cover 110,000 hectares of land. But according to the country's Coffee Research Institute, climate change is having a deep impact on the sector.
In Kenya, we produce Arabica coffee, which prefers cool and wet conditions. Because of increase of temperature caused by climate change and depressed rains, then we have poorer quality of the yields and poorer amounts of the yields.
Erratic rainfall has complicated the lives of farmers.
Now with the climate change, we have unpredictable rainy patterns, whereby in terms of crop production, we are not able to predict when to apply the fertilizers or farming inputs in general, and that one, it affects coffee production.
The irregular rainfall means there are showers during dry period, so some bushes flower too early.
Sasa kwa hii sasa mumea unapata hii iko tayari kuvunwa, hii red ones na hii green ones bado sasa inachukua mara ingine tena kuvunwa hii yenye yaiva kwa shamba mzuri.
This means labor has to be hard for extended periods and farmers' incomes are decreased. The latest figure showed coffee production was expected to decline to 40,000 tons in 2020, down from 47,000 tons 4 years ago.
Finally, a quick reminder of the top stories. Ethiopia says President El-Sisi's threatening comments won't help the GERD negotiation. And an Ethiopian envoy to Qatar lashes out at the UN for failing to understand Ethiopia. That's all the news there is for now.